Okay, welcome everybody to Finding Your Path, our explanation of Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto Zeichat Kodesh Livrocha's exploration of the path of the just, a path that leads a person ultimately to be close to Hashem. Last week we finished off talking about common sins, common pitfalls that people fall into. Rubam begezel. Chazal teaches that most people, one way or another, fall foul of the prohibition of theft. And as we said, theft doesn't necessarily mean grand larceny. It doesn't mean breaking into a bank. It means keeping the light on at night when your room partner in your room is trying to sleep. It means being a little not too careful with like say if you're committed to give somebody some tzedakah, let's say, and you don't give them the full amount, that's a kind of gezel. Gezel can be very subtle, theft can be very subtle, and there are most people, one way or another, fall foul, as we said, of that prohibition. Rubam begezel, mutam, the next level down. Of course, all of these averas that we're talking about now, that he's analyzing him, and we're talking about the midah, again, we should maybe have prefaced this, the character trait of nikiyut, cleanliness. A person cleans after he's done his original, initial work of turning aside from surmeira, turning aside from doing evil, of protecting himself, guarding himself, being watchful and careful not to transgress the laws of the Torah. That's the first level, so to speak. That's kind of, I guess, if you want to draw an analogy, that's the pre-wash in your washing machine. So that sort of takes out the major stains. But to become really close to Hashem, a person needs to go through more processes in the same idea, in the same area of life. And that's called now, the level we're talking about is nikiyus. There are going to be higher levels of this. Cleanliness, cleansing oneself from things which are not so subtle, things which are more subtle. Principally, though, the Mesilas Yesharim is dealing with things which, by their nature, are attractive to people, and therefore they're more problematic. There's an issa in the Torah to not drink the blood of an animal. Now, those people that I know, I don't know, maybe you have different friends than I do, are not sort of rushing around trying to drink blood from the bodies of animals. So that issa is something which is not particularly attractive, and therefore it's not too difficult to steer clear of it. When it comes to money, when it comes to theft, and as we said last week, as it comes to arayot, sexual immorality, the nature of a person draws him to those averas. And that's why the Mesilas Yesharim specifically speaks about these matters. And we're now speaking about the area of negative commandments, don't do commandments, which are to do with forbidden relations, gilui arayos, sexual immorality. And of course there are different levels of this. Of course there's the sin itself of cohabitation in situations which are not permitted by the Torah, meaning if a person is not a husband and wife, when it's permitted for them to be together. But apart from the actual act itself, there are also isurim, prohibitions, which obtain to, and last week we spoke about it, seeing, looking. It's not just that a person is prohibited from having relations, illicit relations, but he mustn't look at a woman who's not his wife. And as we ended up last week talking about the issa of histaklus. Now, as we said last week, and I'll just repeat this, I think it's worth repeating, histaklus means peering, means gazing, means, I guess the word in English is more properly ogling. Clearly it's impossible to go through the world without seeing women. Women constitute probably half, if not more than half of the world's population. But the thing is, how do you conduct yourself? Do you look and look, or do you look and you look away? Do you look with intent to have pleasure, or do you look away? Clearly a person has to train himself this. And as we said at the end of last week's shir, the way a person trains himself is to avoiding looking at things which are maybe provoke one's curiosity, but aren't that fascinating. For example, you always find bags of people gathered around a hole in the road when people are digging it up for no reason except they're curious. So a person walks past that, or a jet plane flies overhead, especially in Yerushalayim, where, well, it's quite common now, but it used to be very uncommon to have planes flying overhead, or a helicopter. You don't have to look up. When a person controls himself in a situation where what he's being tempted to look at is not really, at the end of the day, that attractive, he will find that he develops the muscles of his self-control, that when something comes along that the Yetzer Hara really wants him to look at, something very, really geschmack, a real something, so then he will have developed his muscles in the gym of self-control. And of course, like a person goes to the gym, he tries to bench press, I don't know, whatever it is, 110 kilos or something. So he's not going to have much success. But if he starts off on the baby slopes, to mix metaphors, then bit by bit, when a person trains himself to look where he wants to look and not where his instinct draws him to, he will find that it will be easier. Not going to be easy. It's never going to be easy. The nature of a person is that he has a Yetzer Hara, he has physical desires. That's normal. But if a person learns to train himself to choose where he's going to look, it'll be a much easier, a much more fair-sided affair, a battle which he'll find is much easier for him to succeed in. Okay, so that's really ad kan, as they say, up till, that's as far as we've got so far. That was a brief resume. Now we're talking again about the Indian, the matter of Gilui Arayah, sexual immorality. We're going to approach it now from a different angle, which is the angle of speech. Speaking to a woman. Be'inyan hadibur im ha'isha. Behedya shoninu. We learned explicitly in Pirkei Avos. Kol ha'medaber sicha, marbe sicha im ha'isha gorem ra'al atzmo. Anybody who extends, who makes more, marbe, he draws out his conversation with the woman, will draw evil to him. Now clearly if a person goes into a shop and he needs to ask for, he goes a waitress in a restaurant, he needs to order his dinner, but he doesn't have to get into a big schmooze, about what she thinks about politics, or in other words, you keep it to the subject at hand. So a person who does that, who's marbe sicha, let's call him marbe sicha, increasing conversation, he draws evil to himself. U vishmir omru, and it also says when talking about kol ba'isha erva. So there's two parts here. In, of course, speech. There's no speech. There's no voice without sound. So there are two parts to the Issa. One is speech, and being careful not to speak more than is necessary with the lady, and also the reverse of that is not to the hearing, that the listening to a woman's voice, singing principally, singing, is something which is an issa, which is prohibited. And of course there are various heterim. Some poskim want to say that maybe recorded music is not called kol isha. There's a famous story about Rav Avadia Yosef, who paskined that if a person doesn't know what a particular lady singer looks like, then it's permitted to listen to her sing. Now, Rabbi Vadia grew up and spent much of his life in Egypt. And there was a very famous singer now who's passed away called Kulthum. Kulthum was like one of the most popular Egyptian singers. And he used to listen to her records. But the reason why he gave himself a heter to do this, he never knew what he looked like. And one day, for some reason or other, somebody showed him a picture of her. I don't exactly know the circumstances, but he was so upset because he said, now I can't listen to her sing anymore. So again, there's a heter from that point of view. There are heterim, like if women are singing in a group and you can't distinguish each particular voice. Could be a singer once she's passed away. The idea is that a woman's voice is very attractive, and again, it leads a person to improper thoughts. But not just that. The voice itself is considered to be something which is unclothed, which is naked, which and it's prohibited to listen to a woman singing, and specifically if it's a live voice and if you can see the person singing and you know who they are. Okay, I'm not paskening halachas here. That's a very general outline of the issa of kol isha. Od be'inyan znus haper ha'oizen. Further, in this matter of the znus, the immorality of the mouth and the ear. Dahainu, that is, hadibo b'divrei haznus o hashmiya l'dvarim ha'ele. Talking improperly, speaking, coming into this is using foul language, improper words, obscene words. This is all to do, concerned with the immorality, what's the word I used before, not impropriety, thank you, promiscuity, maybe you want to call it the obscenity, that's the word. The obscenity of the ear and the mouth by listening to obscene or lewd talk, and we're going to see jokes, all of these kinds of things. Gava tzovchu kruchia. Chazal already literally screamed out like a crow or a cock or a rooster. In other words, in their condemning this. It says you should not see in your, this is a pasuk in the Torah, you should not see in your camp, in Devarim, a naked thing. And Chazal darshan that, they extrapolate to say, don't just say not a naked thing, not just a visual thing, but an eres dibur. The word in Hebrew, davar, and dibur have the same letters, they have the same root. I mean, there's much deeper ideas to this, deeper ideas in terms of the connection of dibur and davar, because everything was created in this world. Every davar was created by the dibur of Hashem. And everything in this world is basically Hashem speaking, constantly speaking. As it says, the beginning of Bereshis, of Genesis, Vayomer Elokim, and God said, and God said, and God said 10 times. Esara Maimorim, the 10 utterances with which the world was created, and of course we know about the 10 commandments, so to speak, the Esara Dibros, the 10 Hebrew statements, is not commandments, but speech is the way that the things are created. Therefore, it's a connection, and just like it's the other way around now, just as it's prohibited, a person shouldn't see something which is a naked thing, a thing of nakedness. Also, it's prohibited an ervus dibur, an obscene word. And that's nibul per. Nibul per literally means obscene speech. Disgusting, making the mouth disgusting, literally. And it says, Ba'avon nivlos per, soros rabos, gzeros koshos, mischadshos, buchuri Yisrael mesim. The Gemara in Shabbos Lamed Gimel says, through the sin of obscene talk, lewd conversation, many tsoros, many troubles, afflictions, and harsh decrees are renewed against the Jewish people. And Bechuri Yisrael, the youth of Israel, die. Very, very strong. Chas v'shalom, chas v'shalom. V'amru od, and it says further in that Gemara over there, in Shabbat Lamed Gimel 33 on the base, Kol hamanabel piv, ma'makim lo gehinnom. Anybody who speaks obscenely, they deepen for him his hell, his Gehinnom. They make the pit a little deeper for him. Va'omru sham, it says also over there, Hakol yodim, kala lama nichneses lechuppah. Everybody knows why the bride goes under the chuppah, the wedding canopy. Ella kol ma shemenabel piv va'omru. Anybody who makes an obscene comment about that, afilu gzar din shel shivim shona, even if he has a decree of 70 years of goodness, latova, hofchim lo lara, that 70 years, that decree of 70 years is upside down, is turned upside down, and it becomes a decree of evil. For Rambam also says in Chagiga, very, very strong language here. It also says in Chagiga, Afilu sicha kala shebein ish leishtam magidim loy laodam b'shas hadin. Even a literally sicha kala means a light conversation. Kala means light. There's also an idea of kalas rosh, which means like frivolous, light-headed, light-hearted, we say in English. So even like a frivolous conversation, maybe a flirtatious conversation between a man and his wife, magidim lo, will be repeated to him at the time of his judgment. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of what it is and what is not permitted to say between a man and a wife. That's not for what we're saying now. But clearly, if this is something which is inappropriate, and even if it's your wife, and even if it's something which is fairly, but nevertheless, that's going to come up at the Beis Din Shel Maila, when a person comes to account for all his deeds and his thoughts at the end of his life. So that also will be there. Ube'inyan hashemiya hara hazois gam kein omru. Also, when we're not just talking about the person who makes obscene, lewd remarks, let's say about a bride under the canopy when she's getting married. Also, somebody who listens to that is also, it says about them in Shabbos, afa shomea v'shosek. Even also a person who doesn't say anything. Now, I'm not sure. I think shosek probably means that he doesn't protest. I'm not sure about that. But it could mean that just somebody who listens without actually joining in the conversation. I don't know. I didn't see a neat note here that he says, doesn't bring that up here. And I didn't have a chance to check it out. I apologize. But the literal translation is also not just somebody who speaks lewdly, but also somebody who listens. And he's silent. As it says, Hashem yipol sham. He who has incurred the wrath of Hashem will fall there. That's in Mishlei. Harelecha shekal achushim tzrichim lios nikim min aznus u'me'inyono. Behold, you can see that all the senses require to be clean from immorality and anything to do with it. And that means a person's sight, a person's hearing, a person's dibur. For sure, we're not even talking about physical action. Whether, and even as we said at the beginning of the chapter, even if we're not talking actually about literally physical relations, but any kind of contact which is for example, embracing or kissing, even though they're not asa d'oraisa, but for sure they're prohibited. And anything that stimulates the senses through speech, through sight, or through thought, he's going to come to that. Or even through he doesn't mention this here, but it's also prohibited to deliberately smell the perfume that a woman wears. Anything which is going to entice a person to that kind of feeling and is prohibited. Okay, so these 2 pages got stuck. So let's carry on. Top of page Kuf. Ve'im lechoshcha odam loima. And if a person he'll sort of whisper to you and he say, come on now. Shema omru al nivul peh. Eina ela kadei le'ayim u'lerachik odam min aveira. Maybe not. Maybe that's not true. Maybe the only reason that nivul peh is also, it's not because be'etzim, in its essence, there's something wrong with it. Rather, it's just to scare a person, to frighten a person in order to distance him from the aveira, from physical relations itself. And that's the only reason. And it's only talking about somebody who's hot-blooded and has a tendency to fall foul of that kind of issa. Maybe that's all. That's what this is. That's what we're talking about here. In other words, there's nothing really wrong with it. It's just to make sure a person who's hot-blooded and easily tempted in these areas, to frighten him, to make sure he'll stay on the straight and narrow. Shemidei dabru ba lidei taiva. that because through speaking about it, he will come to arouse his taivas, his desires. Aval b'misha omru derech sechok ba'alma. But somebody who's just joking around. One thinks of comedy clubs, which are a staple diet of obscenity. So you might say, well, that's not really. Misha omru derech sechok ba'alma. If you're just joking around, love milsi, it's not significant. It's nothing. It's nothing. Ve'ein lo chush lo. You don't have to worry about that. So if somebody wants to come to you with this kind of claim, you tell him, Ad kan divrei yetzer hara. This is how far the yetzer hara is prepared to go. Ki mikra mole sheviu Chazal. What he's just saying is the yetzer hara. Because Chazal, our rabbis, are chock full of statements that l'rayosam to prove this idea that it itself is asa. Because it says in Yeshaya, Al Kain, Al Bechurov, Lo Yismach Hashem V'goyme. There's a positive that Hashem is not happy, doesn't rejoice over his youth. Ki, and the end of the pasuk, he brings it later on actually. And on the Yesoimos, and orphans and widows, Lo Yerachem. He will not have mercy. Why? Because of Nivel Peh. Because one of the things that stops Hashem having mercy in these situations is because of obscenity, profanity, lewd speech. So, ki chulo chonef. This is the end of the pasuk. Ki chulo chonef umeira b'chol per dove navola. Why doesn't Hashem have mercy? Because chuloi, chonef, all of them are flatterers, chanifa, umeira, and they speak evil, lashon hara, v'chol pe dove navola, and every mouth is speaking obscenity. All of these are sins with the mouth: flattery, gossip, but not just gossip, also detrimental speech, negative speech, lashon hara, all the laws of lashon hara, and obscenity. Hinei lo hiskir hakosov. So it's interesting. He says, "Hinei lo hiskir hakosov." As the pasuk doesn't mention that Hashem turns away from his youth and the orphans and the widow because of I lost the place. Sorry, because of avodah zarah. It doesn't say he turns away because of idol worship, nor because of gilui arayos, sexual immorality. I mean, we're talking about the act itself. V'lo shfichas domim, and not because of murder. Doesn't say Hashem turns away because of these things. Ela chanifa v'loshen hara v'nivel peh. What makes him turn away is flattery, loshen hara, evil speech, tale-bearing, and nivel peh, obscenity. Kulo mechatos haper b'diburo. As we mentioned before, all of these are sins which are committed with the mouth. Va'aleim yotza hagezera. And on that came out the decree, al bechurov lo yismach Hashem. On his youth Hashem will not have joy. Ve'es soma ve'es almonos of lo yechorachem. And on his orphans and his widows he will not have mercy. Ella ha'emesu. The truth is, Kedivrei Rabbeinu Seinu Zichron L'Rocha, as our rabbis teach us, she nivel peh, obscenity, profanity, hu ervaso shaladibo. It is the mamash, the nakedness of the word itself. Let's really have to understand what he's talking about here. That, in other words, it's not the nivel peh, as we said before, it's just something which is not nice. It is a kind of, nakedness, literally. In the world of speech, just like nakedness in the world of sight. It's a nakedness of the word. It's the same degree of isur. Umishum znus hu shenes habakol sha'a inyeni ha znus chutz mi gufo shel maaseh. And because of the act itself, znus, immorality. It's also these other things are prohibited. K'chol sha'ar inyane haznus, like all other areas of immorality, except from the act itself. That even though all of these other things, what he's saying is all of these other things, even though they're not like the act itself, where the penalty is kores. Kores means various things. Could be spiritual excision, it could be dying without children, God forbid, dying at an early age. That's the penalty for the act itself, if it's an immoral act, if it's an act which is prohibited by the Torah. Now, all of these other things that we're talking about, like speech and like sight, and like listening, and the like, all of these things, they're not punishable kores, or misas based-in, or the death by penalty by a based-in. Of course, if somebody is accused and found guilty with 2 witnesses after he was warned about it, of having, let's say, relations with a married woman, so then he could incur the death penalty from based-in. But nevertheless, even though they don't carry these capital punishments, asurim heim isa atzmam, they themselves are osa. What he's trying to say here is, it's not; these are not just things that distance a person from the actual act. They are in themselves isurim. They are in themselves prohibited. Milvad hayosam gamkein gormim umevim ela isa harashi atzmo. Apart from the fact, of course, that's not to say that they don't themselves provoke and lead to the act itself. Surely sight and surely talk and thoughts, all of these things will lead a person, if he doesn't avoid them, to being in danger of committing the act itself. So for sure, that's true as well. But don't think that that's the only reason they're prohibited is because of that is going to cause something else. No, they themselves in themselves are also osa. Okinian hanozir shezachanu medrash shehiviu lamalo. And it's similar to the idea, as we said, by a nazir, somebody who takes a vow of abstinence. One of the things he abstains from is from drinking wine. And we know that a nazir, apart from not being allowed to drink wine, is also prohibited to eat anything that comes from the grape, from the vine itself, whether it be grapes or whether it be grape juice or currants or raisins. Now, okay, I think we can start this. I don't think we're going to have time to finish it. I'll just mention it. We'll start off here and we'll come back next week, and just I want to point out, I mentioned this, I've alluded to this already, there's another area of human activity which is problematic when it comes to physicality. And be'inyan hamachshava, that is thought. Kvar amru b'tchilas habraisa shalanu, we already saw this, learned this at the beginning of the Braisa, the statement of Chazal, as it says, "V'shdmata mikol dovara," guard yourself from kol dovara, any bad thing. And it says, "Shalo yaharher odam bayom," that a person shouldn't think about improper things which will arouse him during the daytime. V'yavoli day tuma balayla, and he'll come to impurity at night. He will come to have an emission from his body. For Ormu Odin, it says in Yuma, Hirhuri Aveira, Koshim Aveira. Thoughts of sin are worse than the sin itself. Umrikra Molehu, and we have many psukim with this theme, as it says, Tovas Hashem, Kol Machshavos Ra, that it's disgusting to Hashem all kinds of evil thoughts in this case meaning thoughts of promiscuity. Now, it's an interesting thing, I just want to finish off with this, that the concept of Hiru or Aveira is Kosher Me Aveira. Thinking about something, thinking about an Aveira, thinking about doing a sin, is worse than doing the sin itself. One of the things that a person has to be careful about on Yom Kippur, when he's doing tshuva, and many people will be doing tshuva for those kinds of sins. One of the things that a person has to be very careful to do is to not, in his mind, think about what the sin was, because he will be recommitting the sin in his thoughts. He has to approach it in a very general way, without going into reliving in his mind what it was that he did that he's doing tshuva for. Because by doing that, that's like doing the sin, and according to this, is even worse than doing the actual sin itself. Why? How do we understand that machshava can be worse than the action itself? Now, clearly, a person who has a machshava, he's not going to have kores, he's not going to have mises based in. The action in terms of punishment, for sure, is on a different level completely. But in a sense, a machshava permeates a person to a much greater degree. When a person's doing something, he's doing something. When he's not doing it, he's not doing it anymore. But a thought inhabits a person. A thought inhabits a person. The person lives in his thoughts. A person is in his mind. A person is what he thinks. So when something like that enters a person's mind, it becomes very, very difficult to get it out of his mind. It's difficult. It's much easier to physically refrain from doing something, to walk away from something, because although that may take a lot of effort, once you walk away, you're away. You're not there anymore. The potential to do the Aveira has gone. You're not there. You left. But an Aveira walks around with you. A machshava, a thought, walks around with you. It follows you. It interrupts you. It taps you on the shoulder. And in that sense, it's more difficult. It's kasha. It's more difficult to free oneself from a thought which is bad. Now, thoughts fade. Everybody has had some form of thoughts, improper thoughts in their life. Maybe they were caused by experiences that person had. But they fade. And you might ask me, so how do I control my thoughts? And the answer really is very simple. I don't know if it's very simple, but it's very clear cut. The Gemara in Brachas in Brachas Daf Lamed Amud Beis says, the Kodesh Baruch Hu says, Barasi Yetzer Hara ubarasi Torah Tavlin. Says Hashem, I created the Yetzer Hara ubarasi Torah Tavlin. And I created the Torah, which is the antidote. The antidote to the Yetzer Hara. And Stam Yetzer Hara is always when it's to do with immorality. When we're talking about the Yetzer Hara without qualification, the Yetzer Hara that's referring to is the Yetzer Hara for immorality, for promiscuity. Says Hashem, I created that Yetzer Hara, and I also created the antidote, which is Torah. Now, antidotes, it's an interesting thing. A couple of 100 years ago now, Louis Pasteur discovered that by injecting a weakened form of, I think it was cowpox, into somebody who was suffering from smallpox, that it would cure them. Don't hold me to the details. The idea is that if you take a weakened strain of a disease, and that can combat the disease itself. What I'm getting to is something I heard many years ago from Rav Volbe, and I don't remember the source of this. It's a Gemara that says the source of the Yetzer Hara and the source of the desire for immorality actually come from the same place. Which, if you think about it, is why Barasa Torah, Barasa Yetzer Hara, Ubarasa Torah Tavlin. The Tavlin, the reason why Torah is an antidote is it shares the same root. It's coming from the same place. It has the ability to enable a person to resist his Yetzer Hara, because, so to speak, it is the flip side of it. It comes from the same place. If a person is plagued by thoughts of immorality, bad thoughts he should learn Torah. Because the Torah has a way of, there's a word I think in psychology, of sublimating whatever that negative energy and taking it and quite literally flipping it to the tzad hatov, to the good side. That's the main thing that a person should do if he wants to control his thoughts, is to occupy himself as much as he can in Torah. And of course, the deeper he delves into Torah, the deeper he will be able to uproot his thoughts, the more pure his thoughts will become, the more connected to Hashem they will become. The Torah is an amazing thing. You sit down and you start learning about cows falling into pits, and it seems to be all very, prosaic. But you don't realize that this is actually something which is holy. On the surface, it seems it may be talking about torts. It may be talking about things which are boundaries and very seemingly mundane, technical things. But don't let that fool you. All of the Torah is holy. And when a person connects with that holiness, he is connecting to the same root which is going to cure at its basis his desire for these improper thoughts. Barasa Torah, barasa Yetzirah, barasa Torah Tavlim. Okay, we'll pause here today and we'll carry on next week, B'ezrat Hashem, talking about the idea of thoughts and improper thoughts and how they can be controlled and how they have to be controlled.